Let's kick it off. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for coming to my talk today. I'm Jason Taylor. I'm a Microsoft MVP in Developer Technologies and a solution architect at a Microsoft consultancy called Increment. It's great to be here today at NDC Sydney, and I'm thrilled to be presenting this talk, Azure Developer CLI Deep Dive. If you went to Microsoft Reactor yesterday and saw Scott Hanselman talk, or you saw the keynote this morning, I think a common theme that I'm seeing is that we need to embrace the things in development that bring us joy. And the Azure Developer CLI is definitely something that brings me joy. So I'm really excited to share it with you today. So the Azure Developer CLI is an open source tool that accelerates the time it takes to get your app from code to cloud. Now, it includes a range of developer-friendly commands that map to key stages of your workflow. This includes init. So if you run azd init, it will initialize a new application in a current directory. Now, that can actually be an existing code base. And when you run azd init, you can choose a template. So it could be an empty folder or it could be an existing code base. So you can make an existing application azd compatible with azd init, or you can grab a template, say for a React application, and use that. Next up, we have package. This is a command that you're not going to use all of the time, but certainly useful when you're setting up a CI/CD pipeline and you want to create a package and pass it through to various environments. Next up, we have provision, and that's used to provision resources to support your app running in Azure. Next, we have deploy, azd deploy, and that's used to deploy your app to package and deploy your app to Azure. And we also have azd monitor, and that will bring up the application insights dashboard so that you can monitor your application running in the cloud. Now, there are a lot of other commands, but these are just a few that map to your workflow. Now, using azd, you also gain access to templates which are designed to expedite your development. You can also build your own templates, which is something that I've done and I'll share with you today. You can find out everything you need to know about azd at this link. And I mean everything, because it links to the Learn modules, it links to the documentation, it has content on the site itself. So aka.ms/awesome-azd. Let's go there now, and we'll do a little bit of a demo where we just see azd in its simplest use case. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, just remind me when I finish and I'll do it straight away. So if we have a look at Awesome AZD, I'll zoom in a touch on that. It has absolutely everything. So it's got this getting started documentation. It's got documentation on how you can contribute, and that includes how you can contribute a template that perhaps doesn't exist yet. You can see there are 94 templates for AZD. It's also got the general link, which I believe will just link to the Microsoft documentation. But everything you need is here. So let's use it. Let's say that we're going to build a C# application, and we want it to use a React front end. And there's not too many of those. So you can see we've come up with 3 templates. There's React on MongoDB, React with SQL database, and React with Azure Functions. So these templates include not just the code to have a React application running on ASP.NET Core, but also the infrastructure as code to provision the resources that will be required to support this app. Also, pipelines as code. So if we've got, this particular template includes Azure DevOps pipeline as code, and it also includes GitHub Actions pipelines as code. It essentially has everything you need to get this application running in the cloud. So if we wanted to use this template, we can just run this command, azd init, and specify the template. Let me show you that. So if I go over to PowerShell here, let's make a new directory. We'll call it React. We'll jump into that directory and we'll run this command. Now I can also run azd init without specifying a template, and it'll give me a few options such as figure out what to do with the current app that's in this folder or choose an existing template. So I'll run azd init specifying the to-do C# SQL template. So it's now downloading it, initializing a Git repo, and it's asking me for an environment name. So azd, of course, has the concepts of environments. I'm going to call this one React Dev. So it says success. This has now been initialized. I'm not going to waste any time here. This is a deep dive today, so I'm going to run azd up. You didn't see this command before. That's because this command does a few things. First, it packages the application, then it provisions the resources in Azure, and then it deploys the application. So this will take a little while to run. So we'll kick it off so you can see it happening and see the questions it asks. It asks me to choose my subscription. The default is fine. And it asks me to choose the location. It'll default to Australia East. And from there, it's going to go off and do the package, provision, and deploy. Let's have a look at the source code for that one, just because I want to, at this early stage, I just want to point out the things that are included in the template, which are AZD specific. So if I go into Scratch, React, there we go. So in the source folder here, there's our React front end and our ASP.NET Core backend. But starting from the top, we have this AZD folder, which is the Azure DevOps pipeline as code. So the pipeline's been described in YAML, and it's a starter pipeline that will get you all the way to development. Over here, we have dev containers. So we've got an environment that we can spin up in the cloud specific to developing this project. Over here, we have GitHub. That's our GitHub Actions workflow. We've got a choice, right? We can use Azure DevOps. We can use GitHub Actions. We can use something else as well. It's just not supported directly with AZD. But it's actually a very minor thing when you come down to it. Everything else is the same. We've got this Azure Dev.yaml file, which is basically AZD's way of defining what services are included in this solution and what Azure resources these services map to. So actually, that's it. No, that's the workflow. Sorry, that's the GitHub workflow. I got ahead of myself there. So down here, Azure YAML defines the services. So you can see we've got one service, which is called web, where we can find the source code here, and the language is JS. So this is the React front end, and we're going to host it on an app service. And here we've got the API backend, C# hosted on an app service. So there's a range of different languages and hosts which are supported by AZD. So we go back over here. This is running. I estimate this will take about 13 minutes for the initial provision, and then about a minute to deploy the application for the first time. So we're not going to wait around for that. Let's go back to the slide deck. That's the quick start, right? That's how you can get up and running really quickly. Now this is really quick, but it's not trivial. There's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes, and you can have the same experience for your applications that you build, because you can build your own template suited to the requirements of your company or your project or your enterprise. So we're not going to do spend too much time on the quick start. That'd be too easy. This is a deep dive. Instead, we're going to build an AZD template so I can show you how all of those things fit together. This app that we're going to build is going to be a Blazor ASP.NET Core application, and it'll have a SQL Server database hosted on Azure. The infrastructure required will include app services to host the web app, the Azure SQL database for storage, Azure Monitor for monitoring and logging, and Azure Key Vault for storing secrets. We'll also build out the CI/CD pipeline using GitHub Actions, and our infrastructure will be defined using bicep. And that's almost it for the slides, except for a pop quiz at the end, so make sure you pay attention to the commands. Now we're going to dive in and build that template. So we'll go over here. I'll get rid of those for now. All right, so the first thing that we want to do is to create a new Blazor application. So we go .NET New, Blazor, and you can see I've got some autocomplete happening there. So we're going to create a Blazor application, ASP.NET Core 8. We'll have auth individual. So we're going to have ASP.NET Core identity providing authentication and authorization for us. We're specifying to use a local DB because the default is SQLite. We want it to use SQL Server. And we're specifying the output. We're going to put our source code in source.web. And I should mention, this is an empty folder at the moment. So we're starting by creating the Blazor app, and then we'll dive in and make it AZD compatible. All right, so that's done. Let's jump into the directory that contains the Blazor application, and let's go ahead and run it and make sure it's working as expected. This presentation is definitely not about Blazor, so we'll just make sure that this app at least runs before we try to push it up to Azure, and then we'll move on. So where are you, mouse? Here we go. So it's running nice and quick. And I could go and register myself as a user and log in and see the weather forecast. So we can see that now. So it's just random data. But we don't need to do too much more with that. So I'm going to jump back out of that directory. And we will now make it AZD compatible. So first, I will create a Git repo, just locally. We need a git ignore. This is another thing that brings me joy, being able to create a git ignore from the command line. Other things that I like is the editor config. And there's some others I can't remember right now. We'll go git init, create that repository. We'll go ahead and add everything in, and then we'll commit. Here's another thing that brings me joy. Git emojis. Just makes my commit tree a lot more exciting. So there we go. So we've got that committed. So now we're going to run that first command, azd init. We won't specify a template. If I run this, it says, how do you want to initialize your app? You can use the code in the current directory, and there's a few options for that. You might try and figure out what type of application it is and generate that Azure YAML file for us. Remember, the Azure YAML file specifies the apps and how they'll be hosted. Or we can select a template. Now, I want to select a template because AZD has built some really cool starter templates that I can apply over the top of this Blazor application. And I'm going to choose the bicep starter template because that will include some basic infrastructure as code to get me started, including a lot of reusable bicep modules, which are great. It'll also include some skeleton pipelines. So we get started with everything that we need. So continue initializing the app. Yes. And we can scroll down. And these are all of the templates that you see on Awesome AZD. They're available here. And that starter bicep template is there. AZD supports bicep and Terraform. All right, so it's going to apply this template. It's going to ask this question, do you want to overwrite git ignore, or do you want to keep the existing files unchanged? Now, I just created that. I'm pretty happy with it. So I'm going to keep it unchanged. And it's still going to make changes to it. So that's something to keep in mind. But that's OK. We'll go ahead and fix this up. I need to give this environment a different name. So I'm going to call this AZD demo dev because we won't be able to wait 13 minutes for this to provision. So I'll have to switch to one that's provisioned already. So that's done. So let's dive in. So you got a little bit of a glimpse at the template and kind of the components that make it up. But I'll just recap again. AZD follows conventions, right? So these folders and these files that are included is how the AZD CLI knows how to work with your project. So making a project AZD compatible means that you can use the AZD CLI with it. So we've got AZDO, the Azure DevOps pipeline as code. I'll show you that just briefly. So it's just a little bit of a skeleton that we can work on. We've got our dev containers for dev environments in the cloud. We've got our GitHub workflow. This is one that we will have a little bit of a look at later, and we'll get it up and running at least. And then we've got our infra folder. We didn't go into this before. So we've got our main.bicep file, which is basically the entry point. But then the thing that I really love, and I'll zoom in on this to make sure you can see it, is all of these reusable bicep modules for all of the different categories of Azure resources that we might want to use and provision. So for example, if I go into host, I can see a bunch of AKS stuff. I can see a bunch of stuff related to app services and app service plans and container apps and functions. So we don't have to write all of this by looking at the documentation or, maybe working with GitHub Copilot to try and figure this out. We've got these reusable modules here that the team has built that we can start to work with. We can start to understand that we can also extend and change and add our own reusable modules. So this is a really great starting point. And we'll be using some of those because we'll need to define our own main.bicep in order to get our app provision to the cloud. What else do we have? We've got Azure.YAML here. This hasn't been defined yet, so it doesn't actually know what type of app we have and how it's going to host it in Azure. That's something that we'll have to do. But yeah, that's it. That's the bicep starter template applied. There's also a README file. And there's a lot of great information contained within that. So I'd recommend reviewing that before you get started if you're following the same path. Let me see. The only thing that I didn't show you was the main.parameters.json, which passes environment variables to the bicep file as parameters so that it can be used when constructing those resources. Okay, so now what I'd like to do is to commit those changes, and we'll use a cloud emoji. Does everyone know about Git emoji? Does anyone not know? It's like everyone. I mean, we'll have time for that, so let's just go and do that. If you want to bring a little bit more joy to your programming, just start using Gitmojis, and it's essentially going to make your commits a lot more colorful, but also a lot easier to understand. For example, if I'm fixing a bug, I'm going to prefix it with this caterpillar. And so I don't need to say this is a bug fix for something. I just go bug. And I might go like fixes hash 322. And that's enough information for me. Or I might give a little bit more detail than that if I was feeling happy that day. I should be if I'm using Git emoji. So yeah, like bug, new features, coding drunk, right? I've used that a couple of times. What else is there? Rocket, deploy stuff, infrastructure. It's good. I like it. It makes my life a little bit happier. All right, so let's go back. So we just committed those changes. We got nice, clean. That's good. So we're going to look at packaging this application. But before we can do that, we just need to tell AZD about our application. So we'll build out that azure.yaml file. So if I come into separate, what have I got? 1, 2, that's React, that can go. That probably finished by now. Let's see. Yeah, it did. So let's, this is the web app. So if we run that, it might show us the app. Looks like it's going to show us the app. Or it might show us the app service, a new site is coming type thing. Okay, we'll come back to that. So what I want to do is define the services that are in this AZD project and how we'll host them and the types of languages and that sort of thing. So I'm just going to get rid of all of that helpful information and paste in one for this AZD Blazor demo. So you can see we're specifying that there is a single service and its name is web. The language is C#. The source code is contained within source web, and we'll be hosting it on an app service. Simple as that. Now that we've done that, we could run up if we wanted to, package, provision, and deploy. But when I'm building out a template or I'm making a project AZD compatible, I like to take it one step at a time. So let's start with package. So I'm just going to specify an output path so that it doesn't generate one for me. So AZD package. This doesn't take very long. It's basically doing a .NET publish. And it also lets us know at this early stage in the game if we've got everything configured correctly or if we've made a mistake somewhere along the line. Does AZD understand it well enough to package it at least? So after that, we're going to, I changed to a virtual desktop. That's not good. So after this, we're going to provision it, but that takes about 13 minutes. So I don't think, let's have a look at provision. So there's a couple of things that is interesting. When you look at the AZD commands, you can go help, probably could have guessed that, and it brings up some documentation. And I think that's kind of useful. The documentation is very good even from the command line, but you can also go docs and it'll take you to the Microsoft Learn page to give you even more information. So I found that useful when I was learning AZD. There's a couple of things that you can do with provision. As you can see here, actually, you can run a preview. So kind of like a what if. If I was to provision the app now, it might already have been deployed a number of times. What changes will it make to the resources? And it might say it's going to add, update, or remove certain resources. We'll kick it off since that other one's not running. So we'll just run azd provision so that you can see that kick off. And it's going to use those bicep. Did I jump? I jumped way too far ahead. I'm sorry, we got to stop for a second. So it didn't find any changes, right? Because we didn't define any resources in main.bicep. So it understands the app, it can package it, but it can't provision it. I jumped the gun there. All right, so first thing we'll do is we'll create a new bicep module for our web application, which kind of maps to this web service. So I'd create one module for each service. And the way that I've been doing it is I've been creating this app folder, and seems to be a little bit of a convention looking at the other AZD templates. Probably not the greatest convention. A better convention would be to name it services so that it aligns with the definition that we have in Azure.yaml. I think that would be nicer, but I'm going to leave it as app because there's so many things that can break in these demonstrations. I don't want another thing this time. So we'll go web.bicep to represent our web service that we defined in YAML. And I'm going to grab a whole bunch of code. I don't have time to code this all by hand. So let's have a look at that. And if I can make this appearance a little bit better. I can't seem to get that centered layout to be sticky. I should work that out. So we've got a bunch of parameters that are going to be supplied to web.bicep. And these are going to be passed through from our main.bicep file, which the AZD will call. We're going to provision a log analytics workspace. And this is not just log analytics, it's a bicep module for monitoring. So when we do this, it's going to provision also application insights. And because we've passed through an application insights dashboard name, it's going to provide a new dashboard for us, a default. So they've put a bit of thought into these modules, which is really nice. It's really, really good. So it pays not just to kind of use these modules, it pays to dive in, take the time to understand them, because depending on the parameters that you supply, depends on how the resources will be created. So then we've got a app service plan, and we're specifying a really basic plan running on Linux. Then we've got the app service itself, and this is going to be running on .NET 8. We're specifying the tag which represents the service. So you see that, AZD service name. So AZD will actually use that tag to perform various operations, such as checking the current state of the service. You can see I'm passing in application insights name, and I'm also passing in a key vault name. Again, this is a reusable module, and the parameters that we pass to it do a lot of work for us. So it's going to go, and because we passed a key vault name, it's going to create the managed identity for this app service, and it's going to be able to connect to that. We don't have to write this code. They've done it for us. It's another thing that makes me happy. And we've got application insights name, so it's going to link up the app service to that as well. And then we've got a couple of output parameters that we'll be supplying back to main.bicep that we can use. So now that we've got that service defined, we can go and call that module from, I'll see if I can load it here, main.bicep. Okay, cool. So we'll go ahead and call it from here. So this main.bicep is the one that came with the bicep starter template. So it's the skeleton of what we will use, but it's not actually going to deploy any resources, as you coincidentally saw. So it has a few parameters that are going to be passed in, such as the environment name and the location, and they're actually going to be passed in from environment variables, which AZD manages. And I'll show you some of those as we progress along. It's got some default tags. You can define further tags that you'd like to apply to your resources. It's got a resource token. It's a random string that's going to apply to all of our resource names. So resource names are going to be really ugly, but you can see why it's happening there. It's just so that we can provision this quickly without running into any conflicts. Really good for sandbox environments, but we can change that. We can get rid of resource name and add project name and provision our resources with more meaningful names. We won't worry about that for this one. I see this API service name here. I'm going to change that to web service name, which is called web as per azure.yaml. We'll need that in a moment. And there's a resource group, so all of the resources will be provisioned in a resource group. And this is the space where we want to basically call web.bicep. So I've got some code to do that. It'll be in a little bit of a broken state until we finish this. So this is the call to the module that we just made. We're passing location, tags, the web service name, log analytics name, application insights, app service, and key vault details. You can see we haven't got a key vault yet. So we'll call the key vault module to provision that for us. And we'll also create some additional resources for the database and key vault access. So I'll put them up the top here. All right, so looking at these ones, this is key vault. So we're passing in a principal ID. We need to add a parameter for that. Now that principal ID is either going to be us as a user running AZD from the command line. And I realize that's a point that I haven't covered yet. You know, I get this demo kind of ready so that I can give this demo without failures, but there's things that happen in order to set it up, such as AZD auth, right? I log in, I go off and I enter my credentials into a browser and it comes back and I'm authenticated. And then I have an ID, a principal associated with me, and it's going to use that. For example, when I ran AZD up, it ran as my authenticated user on Azure. So we'll have to define a parameter for that. It also, that parameter can also be supplied from, say, Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions, the principal that's running those pipelines as well. And it works either way. So then we have the database. So we'll be provisioning a SQL Server database. That's going to be the server and the database itself. You can see here we're specifying the SQL admin password and the SQL user password. So this bicep template for SQL Server is provisioning two accounts for us, one for us as administrators and one for the application to use. And that's the thing with these templates. When you see a template on Awesome AZD, it's been vetted by the Microsoft team. They've looked at it. They've ensured that it's following best practices. And so when you're looking at these AZD templates, you can have a little bit of confidence that you've got a good chance of following best practices when you use one of those. And when you submit, if you would like to, if you submit a template to AZD, then you get a free review from the Microsoft team. I submitted a template to AZD. They gave me some feedback. I made some changes, and then they listed it in Awesome AZD, which was a really good experience. So I encourage you to do the same if you're like-minded. So then we've got the web key vault access where we're specifying the key vault name and the principal ID. This is just for us so that we can access key vault after the application's deployed, or so that, say, the pipeline that is deploying our application can access key vault if it needs to retrieve some secrets while the application's being deployed. That's cool. So we're missing some parameters, right? Principal ID, SQL admin password, app user password. And this is, oh, I'm going the wrong place. This is actually pretty cool. So we're going to define the parameters at the top of this bicep file first. There's a few others, environment name and location. They'll come from environment variables. So now we've got principal ID, SQL admin password, and app user password. Before I move along, I'm going to also return some values from this bicep file, which will be accessible later in the environment. Let me show you that now. So if I go to PowerShell and I go AZD environment list, I can see the environments that I've currently set up. And if I go AZD environment get values, I can see all of the values that are associated with this particular one. This is the React one, right, that we deployed. So it's showing a lot. It's showing the subscription ID, the tenant ID, the React app API base URL, the React app application insights connection string. It's pretty cool. There's a new command that I found out about this morning when I was reviewing the latest release notes, AZD show, which shows some of that information in a nice, easily digestible format. So you can see the API endpoint, the web endpoint, and the environments, which is pretty cool. I'm going to close that because I don't want to do anything with that React application. There we go. So now what I need to do is to get values for those parameters into main.bicep, and I'm going to do that in main.parameters. That's how we're passing those environment values through. I say values because it's AZD environment values. They can come from environment variables, but they can also come from those values. So I've got here this value of Azure Principal ID. Could be the authenticated user, me, or it could be the pipeline that's running. I've got the SQL admin password, and this is really cool. This is part of AZD, secret or random password. And essentially what it's going to do is it's going to go to Key Vault. And if Key Vault exists, it's going to check Key Vault for the SQL admin password. And if the password exists, it's going to use that. It's going to pass that through to the main bicep. So this key is not going to be rotated unless we want it to. And if it doesn't exist, then it's going to generate a new SQL admin password for us, and it's going to pass that through to bicep. That's kind of nice. I like that. It makes life a lot easier. Okay, so now this time we're ready to provision, but first I'll commit those changes. So if I go git add dot and then git commit -am, and then we need some bricks for infrastructure, and then I get my autocomplete update infrastructure. Good. So AZD provision, bam. All right, so that's going to take, from the hotel room this morning, I'm probably still connected to the hotel Wi-Fi, but it seems to be going fast enough. I didn't switch to the conference Wi-Fi. It took 13 minutes, so I'm just going to assume that's going to take about 13 minutes this afternoon. I will kick it off, but we'll abandon this one because we're not going to wait 13 minutes. Okay, it's underway. All right, now, I just need to make a couple of updates to my application. This is more for me than it is for you learning about AZD. If I don't update my application, it's not going to connect to Key Vault and it's not going to connect to Application Insights, and I wouldn't feel right if I didn't, so let's do that now. So we'll go into program.cs, we'll open up the terminal. Now I need to .NET add package Application Insights. Well, I had to jump into the directory first. Web. And what's the other one? The Azure one. So I need the Application Insights one so I can add support for Application Insights. And I need the Azure, that was funny, .NET. Azure.extensions. Why isn't it auto-completing? Package, Azure. Oh, sorry. I expect things to work a certain way and I get worried if they don't. What package did I install? So I installed Microsoft Application Insights ASP.NET Core. That's good. Yes, and now I need to install Azure Extensions ASP.NET Core configuration secrets for Key Vault support. But it's kind of bumming me out a bit. It's not auto-completing, so I'm just going to cut and paste it because I trust my cheat sheet more than I trust the terminal. So there we go. All right, yes. So now we'll go ahead and add in support for Key Vault. And essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to check if in configuration we can find this Azure Key Vault endpoint. And the reason that it's going to exist is not because we put it in app settings or anything like that. It's because those reusable bicep modules that we're using are going to create that in the app service as configuration just because of the reusable bicep modules doing this work for us. So this is stuff we didn't have to build ourselves. This is stuff that we can extend on. It's really cool. We'll bring in Azure.identity to fix that. And now we'll just add support for Application Insights so that we're getting telemetry going into logging. There we go. Okay. I think that's good. Let's have a look and see how provision is going. It's going well. It's getting through all of the resources. We'll probably jump onto the portal and just see some of those things coming in. And we'll commit these changes too. Git add dot and git commit. We kind of created a new feature, so I'm using stars. This is Windows key dot, if you're wondering how to bring up the emojis. There we go. And I'm not going to push that through. Okay. So if we check the state of AZD provision. It's going well. And we go over to the portal and see what's happening there. So if I refresh these resource groups, I've got this AZD demo dev, and it's in the middle of deploying all of those resources that we defined. And once it's completed, it'll be ready to go, and we could go and browse that Blazor.NET application running in the cloud. But we won't do that. What I'd like to do is switch to configuring the CI/CD pipeline. But there's a couple of things we should talk about before we get to that. Let's just run it. AZD deploy. So provision the resources, and now we'll deploy the application. So you've seen me run a few commands, and you might be thinking, how is this going to map into my developer workflow? So generally, when you have an existing application and you wanted to spin up a new sandbox environment, you maybe wanted to try some things out, you can run AZD environment. I think it's, let me just check the specific command. AZD environment new. I think it's new. Yeah. So you create yourself a new environment. And in doing that, you could then run AZD up, and it will provision to the subscription of your choice, and you would have a sandbox environment ready to go. Now, AZD up, as you remember, it does a few things. It does the packaging, it does the provisioning, and it does the deploying, and all of that takes some time. They've optimized it. It's pretty quick. Like, if there's no changes to be made, you saw it didn't take 13 minutes, right? It was quick. But sometimes you're just making changes to the infrastructure as code. So then you can just run AZD provision, make changes to your bicep or Terraform files and run AZD provision, or run AZD provision preview and get really fast feedback on the changes that you've made, making sure that it's going to work, as expected, and then keep iterating on those changes. But of course, then some of the time you'll be developing your application, you'll be making changes in code, fixing bugs, building new features, and you can run AZD deploy. So AZD deploy is just going to package your application and then push it up to the cloud. So you don't have to go through the step of provisioning. But sometimes it's convenient to just run AZD up. Now, when you finish with your sandbox environment, you might like to consider running AZD down. And AZD down will not delete your source code or anything like that and keep your application intact, but it will deprovision all of those resources. So your application, the app services, SQL Azure, the resource group, all of that sort of stuff will be deleted. So you can tear down that sandbox really quickly. You don't have to write scripts to do this stuff yourself. You don't have to think about the Azure CLI commands to do that, because they built this CLI for developers to map to our workflow the way that we like to work. It makes me happy. All right. So we deployed the application. It deployed under 2 minutes and 9 seconds. And if we come here, sometimes it does that. Got to be a little bit patient. That's okay. We can make a coffee. Or you can press Control F5 like this and just keep pressing Control F5, and then you probably make a coffee. So we'll leave that alone. But you saw essentially we built that from scratch. We provisioned the infrastructure and we deployed the application. So that's quite nice. But we're professional developers. We're using source control. Let's set up a CI/CD pipeline as well. So we can ditch this one. And we could have continued with that one, but let's stick to the demo notes so that the demos don't fail. And we'll look at configuring our pipeline. So this is the same. It's at the same stage. It's been deployed. It's ready to go. We don't have a GitHub repo yet, and we want to run this on GitHub Actions. So now I want to create a GitHub repo. CLIs are all the rage, so we can just go ahead and use the GitHub CLI. We can run repo create. The source code is in the current directory. We'll make the repo public, and we'll push those changes. Of course, I'm already authenticated with the GitHub CLI as well, so you don't have to see that step. But I can press enter, and it's going to go and create that repo, create a commit, push those changes through, and we can go and then browse it on GitHub. So if I go GitHub, browse, it'll fire up, and there's our new AZD Blazor demo repository ready to go. What does it say an hour ago? It's in keyboard. I might need to press Control F5. I did do it an hour ago, but then I deleted it. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, you're probably right. Local time, no, it's in sync. Okay, that doesn't matter. I'm sure it's not going to bite me later. We'll find out. That's fine. Okay, so we've got a repo, and we've committed the changes, and we want to essentially set up our pipeline as code. And as we know, we've got out of the box some sample pipelines as code for GitHub Actions and for Azure DevOps. So if we go in and have a look at those, whoops, oh, it's changed now. It's a cheater. I'm going to get out of this. Control KZ. I'm going to try to get out of this. It's always tricky. Get rid of the terminal. Okay. GitHub workflows, Azure Dev, YAML, and then back. And then this one. I've got to learn to make that sticky. Okay. So the first thing it does is log in with Azure. It says client credentials. This essentially, that's further down. Sorry. So we have a GitHub Actions workflow defined. On push for branches main and master, this workflow will trigger. It's got the necessary permissions it needs to authenticate, and then it has one single job at the moment, build. Now, if this was a user group talk, I'd be up here for 2 hours, and we would build a CI/CD pipeline that goes from dev to staging to production. So if that's something that interests you, I can share you a link on YouTube that shows you how to do that for a talk that I gave at another user group, but we don't have that much time today. So just keep that in mind. We'll go all the way through to development today. So we're going to check out the code. We're going to install AZD, right? So that the build runner is going to have access to AZD. And then we're going to log in. And you see here it says log in with federated credentials. That's good practice. Or log in with client credentials. We're going to configure ours to log in with federated credentials. And so we could actually come back and clean this up later and just remove the whole client credentials login option. So we log in, we authenticate GitHub Actions to Azure so that it can provision resources, and we'll log in using federated credentials. There's so many things that goes into DevOps, and to be able to go from code to cloud, that makes life hard for people who are just trying to learn. And this is something that AZD has done very well by providing these templates, providing these guidance, providing these modules, these starter pipelines as code, really helps to give people a leg up while they're trying to understand all of these things, which is probably going to take them the next 2 years to learn. All right, so we're going to here, you can see provision. So AZD provision, we know what that does. And finally, AZD deploy, we know what that does. So provision is going to provision the resources, and deploy will package and deploy the application. Now, if we're doing a multi-stage pipeline, we'll do it a little bit differently. We'll run AZD package in our build pipeline. We'll upload that as an artifact. We'll save that for later. Then in our deploy pipeline, we'll download that package. We'll deploy it to development, staging, and production, that same package. So this will get us started. All right. So we need to do one thing, which is typically very complicated. We need to go to Azure and set up a service principal and set up some federated credentials, 2 sets of federated credentials, which I've done before manually. I'll show you how to do it with AZD, and there's only one thing you need to remember. So if we go to this project, AZD pipeline config, we could run help. We don't need to run help today. We need to specify the auth type that we'd like, and I'm specifying federated, the alternate option is client credentials, and the principal name. Now, if you don't specify a principal name, when you go to enter ID in Azure and you look at the application registrations, you'll see a name that's something like dev dash, what's the date today? 14th of February, 2024, happy Valentine's Day, 224. So it'll just basically be AZD and then the date timestamp. And someone's going to get mad at you for that. So make sure you specify a principal name. So I've specified SP Web Dev. It's not a great principal name. It doesn't specify the project or anything like that, but you get the idea. So if I press enter, that will go and create that principal. But it's going to do so much more than that for us. So yeah, it'll go to Azure and it will create the principal. It will create 2 sets of federated credentials. But it's also going to go to our GitHub project and it's going to create variables which will then be passed through as parameters to the pipeline as code and also the infrastructure as code. So we don't have to do that. You can see the variables that it's creating there: Azure location, Azure subscription, tenant, client, and environment name. Now, AZD is not so good right now at multi-stage pipelines, but it's also not that hard if you know what you're doing. So if you are interested in learning that, I've got that YouTube video that I can share with you. So I should clarify. The reason that it's not so good at it right now is because even though GitHub Actions now supports environment-based variables and secrets, AZD is just using repository level variables and secrets. But they do have an issue for that particular problem, and they're working on it. And I've seen the team work. I've raised a number of issues myself, and they're really quick. So I'm hoping we'll be seeing this support a little bit more built in soon. But it doesn't really take much to go from a multi-stage pipeline at all. So it says, do you want to commit and push your local changes and start the configured pipeline? Yeah, why not? It'll fail. And why is it going to fail? I know it will fail. I can't remember why it's going to fail. There's one more thing I have to do, but maybe not. Let's have a look. Let's find out. So this is AZD Blazor demo. If we go to actions, it's kicking off. Oh, it's this one that failed. 7 minutes ago, when we created the GitHub repo and it pushed up that pipeline, it didn't have the permission to do what was instructed in the pipeline. It didn't have that service principal or any of the variables that it created. So now it's not going to fail. It'll succeed. So if I go into settings for this GitHub repository and I have a look at secrets and variables, actions, and go to variables, there they are. We didn't have to do that. It did that for us. Now, in the past, I would create a whole bunch of scripts to do this work for me. And I did a pretty good job. But that's not what I want to do. I want to build new features and push changes in front of the client so they can see the cool app that I'm building. They don't care about these repository variables and the service principles and that sort of thing. And to be honest, neither do I. I just want to get from code to cloud as quickly as possible, following best practices with the CI/CD pipeline that can make sure that the value that I'm providing can be delivered quickly. And that's the goal. And that's what AZD provides. All right, let's see how things are going. We've got that pipeline running, right? Where is it? Here. Actions. Okay. So it's going to provision the infrastructure, but there's no changes. This has been deployed, so that won't take too long. And then it'll run deploy, and that application will be up and running. So now, in the future, we don't have to, for our normal day-to-day stuff for the developers in our team, we don't have to run AZD provision and AZD deploy. We can just commit our changes and push them, and our pipeline will pick them up and move them through to the dev environment in this case. So we're pretty much good to go. We just need to extend that pipeline out. All right. So how do we take what we've built today and turn it into, come back. I'm really good on the trackpad, as you can see. So it's my professional. Okay, how do we turn this into an AZD template? So to do that, we have to make sure that what we've built follows the AZD conventions. And because we use the Azure Developer CLI bicep template, we did that. We have our pipelines as code. We have our infrastructure as code. We have our Azure.yaml file. They're all in the right locations so that AZD knows where to find them. And even if you're not using AZD, having those conventions and that consistent layout from project to project of these infrastructure and pipelines and things like that, that's nice. That's something I don't have to think about so much. Maybe little tweaks here and there, specific to the project or the enterprise or the team, but it's a really great starting point. So the good news is that we've already done everything that we need to do to make this into an AZD template, and we can actually use it right now as an AZD template. So let me demonstrate that. I think that pipeline's still running, but that's okay. We don't need it to finish today. We can go here. So if I drop back a couple of directories, scratch, that would be good. And we create a new NDC Sydney directory, and we jump into that. So we've got a new directory. I haven't really done anything yet, just an empty directory. So I'm going to go azd init, and I'm going to specify a template, Jason Taylor Dev, the GitHub organization, and the repository name. This is the repository we just created and pushed up. We can use it as a template because it follows AZD conventions. So now, like before, when we did the React one and we did azd init, it's downloading it, it's asking for an environment name, and we can go ahead and create that environment. Now we can go ahead and configure our pipeline if we want. And give it a name as well. We don't have to wait. We don't have to deploy anything in order to get to this stage. And it's going to ask us what subscription we want to use, which location we want to use, all of that sort of thing. But it's also going to go off and create a new GitHub repository for us. And we can give it a name. I'll just call it NDC Sydney. Hopefully I don't have another repository called NDC Sydney. And it's creating the service principal, and it's going to create the federated credentials. And then it's going to ask me if I want to push those changes through. And I will say, yeah. And everything will be in place for this template that we've just built to be used to provision, to deploy, to kick off the CI/CD pipeline in just 2 commands, right? We created GitHub repos and all sorts of things. Just 2 simple commands. That's really nice. All right. If you do run into any issues, remember the AZD team and the developer community are working on these issues. And the cool thing about living in Australia is if you raise an issue, the team will likely get to it overnight. You'll at least get a response. I've been stuck a couple of times, finish up the day stuck, and then come back in the morning, and there's been help there to keep me going. If you want to build your own templates, definitely go and check out the contributor guide before you get started. There's a lot of useful information in there. It's not just also about, say, contributing a template that you write yourself from scratch because you need it. You could also just request a template, and someone from Microsoft or the developer community will build that for you if there's enough demand for that template. So you don't have to be an expert in order to get the template that you're looking for as well. So there's an awesome AZD site covers all of that. You'll find a lot of useful information there. All right, let's go back to the slides for our pop quiz. Okay, so if you're getting started with AZD and you want to initialize a new application in the current directory, what's the command? AZD init. So good. When we did this at DD Brisbane, people kept saying init. I'm like, no, we're in a classroom. This is a school. You've got to be specific. AZD init. Yeah, I know. So there's a couple of tips here. So you can run AZD template list if you just want to see those list of templates. And you can run AZD init and the name of the template. So you see that AZD Blazor one, that's the template that I created, not today, but previously, and I've pushed that through to Awesome AZD, so you can actually find that there. And I've got another template that shows multi-stage pipelines, so you can talk to me about that if you like. Don't forget to use AZD Auth login to set the appropriate subscription for what you'll be doing today. All right. Oh, and AZD up. We know AZD up. We know AZD down, right? So we can tear down those resources. Particularly good for a sandbox environment. Next up, packaging services with AZD. Anyone know the command? AZD package. So easy. So many people got it wrong last time. I did a better job, obviously. So AZD package, a couple of tips. You can specify an individual service that you'd like to package. So you don't have to package up every single service. If you just want to try one, you can specify it there, and you can specify the output path. Where I use this most frequently is when I'm checking that I've defined my application correctly in Azure.yaml, and when I'm building out a multi-stage pipeline. All right, how do we provision Azure resources for an application? Provision? No. AZD provision, that's it. So a couple of tips. Don't forget preview. You can run a what if, see what's changed. This is useful for two things. One is if you're making a bunch of changes and you've got more to go and you just want to see if what you've done right, what you've done so far is right. And also, if you want to run it as part of a stage in your CI/CD pipeline and you want to gate that stage and say, hey, you need to go and look at what's going to change here and approve that before we go to production. So you can run it there as well. All right, how do we deploy an application to Azure with AZD? No, it's too easy, sorry. AZD deploy web from package. So this is the CI/CD pipeline, right? We're specifying the service we want to deploy and the location of the package. Okay, so this is something we'll do in a CI/CD pipeline. You can do it from the command line as well. It doesn't make much sense from that environment. You just take a big bang approach there. So how do we monitor an application which has been deployed to the cloud with AZD? Yeah, AZD monitor. So tips, AZD monitor. This is we should just look at these. So AZD monitor overview, which brings up the overview page, live to bring up live metrics, and logs to bring up the log analytics logs specific to the application. So this is our NDC Sydney one, right? It's all done. The pipeline we can check. It's still running. That's okay. Maybe our other one is finished. Let's go to here. Dev, AZD Blazor demo, and we go AZD monitor. Okay, so the bicep module created a dashboard for us so that from the command line we can run AZD monitor. And you've got to remember this is a multi-environment thing. So if I wanted to, I can go AZD environment select, and I can select staging or dev or production, and I can run AZD monitor and bring that dashboard up really quick. And so we've got AZD monitor live, our live metrics, and you get the idea. There's a few commands there. So AZD is worth exploring. Yeah. Okay. And how do we configure pipelines with AZD? This is a challenging one, so take your time. No, that's how we authenticate ourselves. But how do we set up a service principal with federated credentials and add the necessary variables to GitHub? That's a good shot. That's a good shot. It's easier than that. AZD pipeline config. Everything with AZD is easy. So just, yeah, if you feel it's too complicated, just double check. So the only thing that I want you to remember, and this is important, when you do run AZD pipeline config, make sure you specify the principal name, because the other principal name that it's going to generate, AZD date timestamp, not good. And then you can also specify the provider. So the default is GitHub Actions. You can also specify Azure DevOps as well. And I mentioned that, you know, AZD supports GitHub Actions and Azure DevOps, but you can use other pipelines with it. Like if you want to use, I've gone blank. What are the other? Octopus, yeah, of course. Yeah, we used to use, yeah, and Bitbucket. So it's not so much about AZD. AZD is really helpful, right? Because it does these things for us. So it's not going to configure credentials in Bitbucket for you. But once you've done that, it's not an AZD concern. You're just pushing changes and the pipeline's kicking off, right? You can use AZD commands in that pipeline if you want, but you have to define it yourself. So the support is there. All right, I'll just share some resources. This is the AZD project on GitHub. This is where you can go to interact with the team, see what issues they're working on, which is really interesting for me when I want to see what the new features are coming up. There's AZD docs. I mean, really, the one you want to remember is awesome AZD. Everything links off to it from there. And there's also training. It's worth mentioning. There's a whole course on the Azure Developer CLI on Microsoft Learn, which I've done, and it's good, and it shows you how to build a template. It won't take you through to a multi-stage pipeline though, so I'm your guy for that. So in the past, when I and possibly as recent as maybe 1 year or 2 years ago, my goal was to be able to go from code to cloud in 45 minutes. And my reasoning for that was, well, if I'm starting a new project, I'm going to come in at 8 a.m. I'm going to get deployed to cloud in 45 minutes with, hello world, this is where we're going to build your application. And then I've got 15 minutes to make a coffee before we go into sprint planning. And I thought that would be amazing. And I achieved that. And I built a whole bunch of infrastructure as code. I built pipelines as code, and I built scripts to do all of that. It was a lot of work, and it's work that I now have to maintain. I don't want to do that. I just want to build features. So now with AZD, instead of it taking me 45 minutes and having time for a coffee, I can now do it in 5 minutes while I'm making a coffee. And I don't have to maintain any of that. So this is an amazing experience, and it's one that's bringing me a lot of joy. All right, I hope you've enjoyed my talk today. If you did find it useful, or you think that the template that I built will be useful, please give it a star on GitHub. I'd appreciate that. And thank you. Cheers all. I think 2:40. Yeah, we got time for a couple of questions.
An intrusive thought.
Yep.
When you're deploying from the command line and you Control C or you close that, what state does it leave it in? And does AZD down kill?
Oh, the deployment's happening on Azure. So yeah, you just go to the resource group and check out deployments and see how it's going. Yeah.
It's not doing it bit by bit by bit.
No. Yeah, it's just reporting back. See how it's going. Yeah. Good question. Yes. Can you speak up? I'm just going to come closer. Okay. Oh, in runbooks. Does it work in runbooks, or can you provision runbooks? I mean, I assume so. I've never tried. The fact is that you're running PowerShell commands inside your runbook. You can install AZD and you can run those commands. So I don't see why not. Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, I would think so. Because, when it comes down to it, what you would do in a runbook is the same as you would do in GitHub Actions or in AZDI pipelines. Yeah?
When you run an AZD dev, when you touch and remove anything that was previously in that deployment, so say you update your deployment script so it remove the database,
yep.
you actually effectively remove that as well.
No.
You have to go manually clean up.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Good question. So will AZD remove resources that you have deployed once the infrastructure as code definition changes? Yeah, no, it will add, it will update, but it won't remove. You have to remove that yourself by default. All right. Thanks, everyone. Cheers, mate.